What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the NIL Show. I'm Adam. There's Tate. You know you're in the right spot. This is season 2, episode 25. Quarter century here. We have a very special guest with us. I say that every time, but Jamie, you really are special. We have Jamie Wood, who has spent about 7 years at the Ohio State University in compliance. You were a football player there. You were at Texas A&M in the NIL space. Beyond that, and maybe the most important and interesting thing is you were contestant on F-Boy Island, which is, oh, that's a sleeper fact there,
this.
Tate. Oh, yeah. I do my research, baby.
That I don't put that on my resume, but I mean, I think if I need to spin it in the essence of like NIL, I feel like it's no different than 12 games that you might appear on. I was on 3 episodes. I didn't play, so I might have been like a special teams kind of guy, or maybe just a guy just wearing the jersey. But yeah, if I need to speak on it, I will spin it how I need to.
Hey man, it's a new era. It's brand building, right? Like any press is good press. Get yourself out there, get those credits. I think you just posted something on Instagram about that. Was that like a COVID project? Like I'm so curious. Let's start there. Let's start there. How did that come about?
This is totally not college athletics. It was March of 2020, man. And I'll be pretty candid. I'm an open book. And first, thank you for having me on. Tate and Adam, I'm really a big fan and supporter of you two and what you're doing in the space. And thanks for this platform. And just to talk about F-Boy Island, which I did not expect or prepare for, it was in the middle of COVID, man. March of 2020 is really the date in which I actually decided to separate from my ex-wife. And so the reason I am bringing that part up is because I transitioned out of my home that we owned together, and I moved with my grandma for about 1.5 years. During that time, it was in the middle of quarantine, in the middle of all of that. And throughout that time, man, I was sought out by 2 different HBO shows, and it came through the form of a DM via social media. And I thought both were fake. The first one was like 12 Days of Christmas or 12 Dates of Christmas, which was a big flop, I think, from a show standpoint. And then this F-Boy Island, which I didn't know the name of the show as I was going down it. It was a first-time show. They said dating, competition, and tropical island. And I said yes.
Sign me up.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about COVID, we were locked in a house. I was at my grandma's. I was kind of there was no need to go rent or go out and spend money. I was still working from home. We did that for about 1.5 years or 2 years while I was working in compliance. And I had to have the conversation with Gene, with my supervisor, with all of the parties that be about, hey, I got this opportunity. I want to explore it. I don't know enough to really say what it is or whether it will tarnish the brand or make me look like a fool, but I plan to conduct myself as well as I can and say yes to this opportunity.
I would have given anything to be a fly on the wall for the conversation with Gene Smith about
and it says a lot about him as a leader as we kind of talk about Ohio State and what they are and what they've become. Man, I don't think that place is the same without him. Anybody that lasts in this industry for 20 years in a single place, they're doing something right. And it's not just him alone. I think it's the people he's surrounded himself by and the way that he empowered the different units. One of those being compliance and the way that we operated as what I like to say is the central nervous system of the athletic department. He made sure that we were a part of any and every conversation. No different than you want to hire a good legal counsel. He kept some pretty heavy hitters on that compliance team. And I would not be where I'm at without every one of those individuals that really could be running compliance offices across the country, in my opinion.
That's awesome. Well, and there are a couple lessons there. Like one, to athletes that are going through this right now, like real brand deals in real life do happen through DMs, even at the level of HBO, right? So
I'm going to say this, and we're going to close the book on the reality show aspect. This is now very odd because one of my best friends was on Love Island this past season. I didn't know Jamie was on F-Boy Island, and now I have another friend I found out that is going to be on The Bachelorette this season. So I'm just surrounded by
You're the
reality
common
shows.
denominator.
You're next, you and your wife.
No,
Yeah.
no. I don't know how well the Campus Inc. brand would be represented.
To put a final bow on that, the reason I said yes to that experience is I realize a lot of my life I've been very conscious of my reputation, trying to do things right, being agreeable, being like this harmonizing person. And I think when it came down to yes or no, the reason I was going to say no is because I cared about what everybody else thought.
Yeah.
And as you think about the athlete journey in this NIL space, that is a big part of like every conversation I had with athletes. It could be the most confident person on the court and on the field. And in many ways, they are insecure as it relates to presenting themselves in all facets on social media. And so, really giving my life to a production company that could edit me any type of way was very scary. But I think it's helped build my confidence to really be all that I am in all facets. And so I don't regret that experience in one bit. And I got a
That's
promotion
awesome.
after it, which was a pretty cool thing because I thought it was going to ruin my career.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
Jamie, make a great point there. And like, I get this question all the time. I'm sure you do as well. Adam, I'm sure you may have gotten it as well. Like, how did you get into NIL? Like, how did, all this happen? And I can relate a little bit to what you're saying, Jamie, because on a much smaller scale, when I was playing, professional baseball overseas, I like had more free time on. Everybody's always like, "Oh man, they think pro athletes you just have like you're so busy." I'm like, I had too much free time. I was bored. Like, I'd get everything done in like a 3-hour span. I had nothing else to do. So I started diving into like, okay, how can I produce some content around this? How can I start building my brand as an athlete? So I started doing a lot of like YouTube vlogs and like both short and long form content around it. And when I saw like, I was like in the same boat, you come up through college and it's very like coaches telling you, hey, just focus on baseball. Don't get involved in anything else. And I was like, wait, I can do this and like still maintain a focus on my sport and getting better, but I can also professionally develop a little bit. And when you kind of make the choice to like jump a little bit and put yourself out there and be like, this is me, this is what I'm doing. You may not like it. There may be some people that like, man, why are you doing that? Like, just focus on ball. But like, I got a lot of respect for that decision because I had to go through a little bit of the same mentality of like, no, it's cool. Like, I'm going to show this. I'm going to put myself out there. If people don't like it, frankly, I don't care. I don't need you like in my life a little bit. So I do have a lot of respect for that. But that getting into the branding side is like, that's where I started to take ownership of it and how I ended up in this crazy industry.
well, and you're told like, especially being a part of a team, you're told like, hey, this is how this organization, this mechanism is going to operate. And it's great and important to do that within that context, but it's really difficult then when you're outside of that context to not still put on that identity of like, nope, I need to operate within this mechanism and I am only here to serve what this, bigger piece is. And the irony is most of the reason you find, I'm using the term mechanism to talk about a team and its goals and how it functions as a unique organism. The reason you found a place within that mechanism is because you have been really good at what you do and showing up as your authentic self in those skills and in that context. But then when you go outside of that, you're afraid to show up as your authentic self. You're afraid to be genuine. You're afraid to kind of put yourself out there when that kind of mentality in a different context is exactly what got you to the position of success that you got in. So it's kind of a crazy dichotomy, like these two worlds we live in as athletes, and watching these young people navigate it, especially in the world of social media. It's like, man, there's a lot of scary things that you have to do and you have to navigate. But once you get on the other side of them, there's so much more freedom there. And you start to realize like, hey man, the people that want to be around me because of who I am are going to stay around me. And the people that want to celebrate me because of who I am are going to celebrate me. And in the era of NIL, the people that want to pay me because of who I am are going to pay me. But that's a tough lesson to learn.
Yeah, it was, man. But I think, I'm a believer in nothing is wasted, all experiences, all interactions, I think have value in the end. It may not feel like it right now, but now I can look back. That is a reference point that I can speak to an athlete about. That's an experience that I could relate. That's a regret that I don't have because I embraced it and I took the lessons from it. And I probably wouldn't call a girl toxic. I probably wouldn't say that. That's probably the biggest takeaway, which ultimately got me voted off. So
I love it. Well,
Lesson
let's
learned.
dive in. Let's dive into some of your compliance experience at Ohio State, because this, you were there for 7 years during a really interesting time, right? You kind of saw a little bit of the growth and explosion of college athletics into kind of the social zeitgeist and all these crazy media rights deals. But then you also saw those COVID years. And there's a lot of, compliance decisions in COVID. Do we give people extra eligibility? Do we not give people extra eligibility? What do we do with competitions and stuff getting canceled? And then pretty quickly after that, the transition into the NIL era. So, a lot of people wonder, why is compliance such a wet blanket, right? Like, let's be real. That's what a lot of people ask. I don't agree or ascribe to that perspective. But what was it like? I know you said it was awesome, being in an organization with wonderful people and, under Gene's leadership. But I'd love just to hear, like, that's crisis after crisis after crisis. How did you guys navigate and make sure that Ohio State and, frankly, as one of the Big Ten leaders, came out on top and in the position you guys wanted to be through all of those crises?
yeah, I think I believe in the team. I believe that, compliance alone is not an appealing piece, right? Like, I think if you don't have the posture of service and of solution minded compliance, you are seen as a barrier or but what we tried to do is we tried to be a bridge to our coaches, to our student athletes. I think so much of what compliance can use a branding kind of support, because when a coach comes into a athletic department, you are dealing with the experience and the perception that they have of their compliance department from their previous institutions. And many of them were not staffed with 15 people like Ohio State was, which allowed us to do both offensive and defensive compliance elements. So it wasn't just reactionary. You bring me a problem or I find something and I'm slapping you on the wrist. It was, hey, I know you want to do this, but here's how we need to navigate this to get you close to that or to get you to that point in which you wanted to be at. But I think I give that to, like, our leadership, even within the compliance office. Is we have people like Paya Lapambara, who works at Hush and Blackwell now as a partner there. We have Justin Kumi, we have Carly Grimshaw, Danny DeLuzio, who worked at the NCAA. People that are like heavy hitters that understood, like, we are just of service to all these stakeholders, and education is the foundation of what we do. We educate, we monitor, and at the top of the pyramid, the smallest portion, like the suites, which is a little out of whack in my life right now, the suites, the top of the pyramid is enforcement. And so, but that gets the most public. Everybody sees the enforcement mechanism. And I think a lot of people don't understand how the NCAA even functions. They don't know, like, what this ecosystem really looks like. They just see headlines, and even right now, people are blaming the NCAA for all this stuff. Well, the NCAA is made up of all the ADs and all the leaders within the membership that have made decisions that have kept us where we're at right now.
So question, because there's what we see and what we experience is, like, apparel as it relates to NIL, in my opinion, is one of the truest, we've said this before, is one of the truest forms of NIL. And we see a lot of stuff get lumped into those three letters that really aren't name, image, and likeness. The purest forms are apparel, trading cards, and the video game. Like, there's other things that are there, but, like, those are the three, like, pillars of true. There's not really any way you can misunderstand how name, image, and likeness relates to those three things. But we still run into these barriers. And I know Topps does. I know Onnit does. I know Panini does. I know EA did. Where, like, you've got this huge slide rule of people's understanding of how that should go. So my question to you is, having seen it from a couple of different institutions and through the long term, what do you see as like the biggest disconnect between like the compliance side of things and the compliance officers, we'll call them, versus like the NIL directors and people who are really more like athlete focused on the negative side? And then where do you see schools doing it really well? And what are kind of the characteristics about the ones that have figured out how to bridge that gap of, like you said, you've got C-suite, you've got leadership, you've got licensing, you've got compliance, you've got student athlete development. Like, what do you see as the common characteristics between ones who crush it and ones who miss it?
So my mind works in analogies probably more often than it should. But I think it helps me to paint the picture where if you think of like a football practice, you have your individual, you have interior, you have perimeter, where like your individual component of practice is each individual position. Your perimeter is like your DBs, receivers, your quarterback's going to throw the ball. Your interior is like the interior lineman. And I think if you think of like our departments in that facet, if like you have each individual unit is hired to play a individual role in this ecosystem. Do we have the appropriate collaborative spaces and operations that allow for all of these parties to come back together? If you're just running individual all practice, you're not going to function well once you bring perimeter and bring the full team together. And I think what I see in departments, both departments that are doing it well and even talking to colleagues across the country, is that they have collaborative environments. They have created task force. They have created mechanisms in this new and innovative space that allow the right people to be at that table and to be empowered to speak from their vantage point, their expertise, into what we are now trying to create as the play. The play we are trying to run takes all pieces. And unfortunately, our model of college athletics is very siloed and fragmented, and Jamie Wood is compliance and compliance alone. I don't believe, like, Jamie had a communications degree. Jamie could do student athlete development. Jamie could do all these other things, but we're not extracting and giving people opportunities to be more than what you hired them to be in a single, in their title. Like Tate, when he was in compliance or when he was in NIL, he had the strategies piece, which allowed him to be that. But for me, my title was assistant AD of NIL, which is very vague, which I played the strategy role. I played, a bunch of different roles within that space. But I think for traditional minded folks in traditional departments, they see you in one facet, you play one position.
Yeah. And I think that was something that I Jamie, I know we've chopped it up on this too, but like everyone who sat in an on-campus NIL role has kind of gone through the same thing where we sat in a really unique role where it's like, you could make a strong argument that we were the only ones in a department where we literally touched every single other department in some way, shape, or form. Like there was not a single department that I never had to collaborate with a project on, whether it was fundraising, whether it was social media and branding, even things that I never thought I would get in the weeds on, but like figuring out, okay, how do I put together a script for an in-venue ad read? Like, okay, I've got to figure out how to do that. I've got to figure out how to plan events. So with that though, like, yeah, people would always say like, oh, if it's not NIL, it's not really, doesn't involve you. But then I'm like,
it is.
Yeah, but everything else, everyone else does affect me and how we go about building this, because we are both an internal driver of revenue, of success, but also a major external driver, because every donor event that goes on, what do people want to talk about? They want to talk about NIL. They want to ask, hey, how can we support NIL? So it's very much you have to think about NIL a little differently in how, those on-campus roles are. And I think some of the best ADs out there, like I give my AD at Kansas a lot of credit, Travis Goff. He did an awesome job of from day one being like, hey, I know it says NIL in their titles, but they are going to touch all of your departments, so you better loop them in. Yeah. But I know there's a lot of on-campus staff that aren't as lucky with having that kind of leadership.
Yes.
So it makes for a tough job in some days.
Well, and to your point, Tay, like it touches everything, right? But also, as we've seen this progress, and this is what I kind of want to get into now. We got the House versus NCAA case that's recently been settled, which is probably the biggest domino, but definitely not the last domino that's going to fall in creating the future of what college athletics looks like. Um, are you pleased or are you displeased, Jamie, with the result of that settlement?
I'll answer this in a Charlie Baker fashion.
True, the governor.
Yes, I think it's progress, right? It's a step in the right direction. I think, as in a similar sense, we see in government, we see in a lot of um, entities that have governance structures that the end user doesn't necessarily have say
Yeah.
in what is being kind of dished out. And I think
Preach.
that's the biggest, I think, a failure for any organization is that if you have people working the conveyor belt line, like you want them to have some say, at least to let them weigh in. You don't have to go with everything that they say, but right now what I see is that there's an adversarial component right now. It's athletes versus the institutions, which is should never be the case. But I think because of the threat to the nervous system of our departments, it's created a sense of threat and uh, a pendulum swung to where the athletes maybe do have a little bit more leverage right now. How can we create a win-win-win for everybody in this space is what we need to think about. But I think it requires giving them a seat at the table, allowing them to understand and educating them in the full capacity. But I think right now the institutions have their own interest in mind. As much as Jamie was athlete centric and about the athlete working at whatever institution, I that my paycheck was being written by the institution, and so I could only go so far. And till I said, athlete, stop telling me what you're telling me, because if you keep telling me, I'm going to have to report you, and I'm going to have
Mhm.
to do my job because this is my job. And
Man, me and
so right
Jamie
now
brought that
there's
up
just a
so many
gap.
times.
There's a gap right there where the athlete has nobody.
Yeah. Well, and you bring a perfect point of like everybody wants to believe that like, oh, the institutions are for the athlete no matter what. And even during March Madness, my wife she got sick and tired of me hearing this, and then she got on board with it. Every time she'd see this commercial, like the NCAA making amazing progress and benefits and resources for student athletes because we care. It's like you didn't care, you were forced, you were
Yeah.
sued, so you have to do that. And all you have to do is like look at the names of these cases, right? Like House versus NCAA, Fontenot versus NCAA. Like you don't do a really good job convincing athletes, let alone the public, that you have the student athlete's best interests. When you had an opportunity to do it, you didn't. And then you doubled down and decided to turn it into an adversarial environment.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people are concerned about collective bargaining. They're concerned about, unions, what have you. But at the end of the day, history shows you cannot trust that institution to do the things that are truly in the best interests of at least its student athlete portion of its stakeholders and its student
Yeah.
body. And so you have to have this environment now because that trust has been broken of you're going to do it on your own.
To kind of touch a little bit more on the collective bargaining piece, like, is there, I sound like a broken record. I know I've said it to both of you guys offline a million times. Is there a perfect solution? No. Like, no, there isn't right now. But Jamie brought up a great point with like, school NIL staff. At the end of the day, our checks still get written by the university. Um, so our at the end of the day allegiance is going to be to the school and to who's writing our checks, and that's natural. That's an employer employee relationship, right? Like the coaches are in the same boat. They are going to be responsible to the school. The collective in the same boat ultimately is responsible, to the school, because if the school takes away their public backing, they're gone. So you have all these people that are, dedicated to the school. At the end of the day, they're going to side with them. Baseball term, tie goes to the runner. It's always going to go to the school. Okay, then now who's backing the athlete? It's not 95% of agents. Like we've all joked about that. Like 95% of agents they're not expertise enough in the industry. They don't know the nuances of how athletic departments work or what's going on. And at the end of the day, they are responsible to their agency. And so the second a player comes along that can earn them more and is less high maintenance to deal with, hey, I appreciate it. I got to go focus on this guy over here. So we're left in a solution of, I do think there needs to be, and I'm hopeful for, some form of a players association, a group that can actually look out for the best interests of a lot of these players, that also has industry expertise to
100%.
have a big enough name and clout to get a seat at the table with the schools in the NCAA. So I think that's the natural next domino that I think we're waiting on.
I agree. I think that's what we're going to see as this case, both of these cases and all of these cases get brought to the surface. Is it's going to come back to that point, and it's either we're going to come through the back door and sign these athletes on a one-off DM like conversation, or universities are going to be open to building a bridge and understanding that empowering the athletes with a voice and with a seat at the table should not be a threat. We're in partnership with athletes now. You don't own the athlete. And I think that's the dynamic shift right now, where it was institution and then athlete. And now it's like maybe here where athlete kind of over the institution. How do we build a bridge to where we can be counterparts, we can partner to figure out what this future needs to look like. And I think that's where the missing mechanism is.
Jamie, you're exactly right. When you kind of said like, oh, it's kind of shifted a little bit now. I say a lot of people have, turned coaches adversarial, where anytime a coach says something about NIL of like, man, it is really hard, everyone's quick to attack them. I'm probably guilty of it. But, everyone's quick to attack coaches and admins for saying like, this is really hard. And like, it is. Jamie, you and me both saw, like we sat on recruiting visits. It is next to impossible to recruit and retain a roster effectively right now. It is really hard. That's not sustainable. We need to, and I'm hopeful for, we can kind of come back to this level ground where I grew up the son of a coach. Like, so I saw how it used to be, and I've seen how it changes now from an admin side. Like, there's got to be some more control and some more regularities that are in place so the coaches can do their job. They can 100%. Get back to coaching, and admins can actually, focus on doing their jobs without constantly having to think, well, what about NIL? Right. Because right now that's how it is. Anytime, whether it's MMR, fundraising, anything, have you, there's always okay, I've done my project, but now I know I'm going to get barked at if I don't include NIL in this. So I think it's all part of the, industry as a whole maturing. But when we can get back to here with that level playing field of coaches, admin being in partnership with the athletes, like that's where it's going to become the sport that is like, this is what we know and love. This is what we want moving forward.
Well, and what we saw with this NCAA versus House case, we've talked about, Tate, you and I have been in a number of conversations about this, of like, I think we can all kind of agree on a general number that to run a really competitive Power 4 athletics program that is able to move the needle in recruiting and retention, which I'm so glad we've reached a place where we can just talk about like, hey man, this is recruiting and retention. Yeah. It is. Let's not say like, ooh, but it can't be recruiting. That number's probably in the 20 million range. Like we've had enough conversations. There's been some things that have been FOIA'd. We're like, it's probably somewhere in that ballpark. Ironically, that is about the number that has been required of schools to pay out of their media budget.
Pure coincidence, I'm sure.
Yes, coincidentally, as a result of this NCAA versus House case. It's funny how stuff just happens like that, and it's there's no math that takes place here. So my question to you, Jamie, is like, okay, we've talked about this kind of being out of balance. collectives are the ones that are basically responsible for fundraising and distributing that mechanism of stability for recruitment and retention. Now that just kind of shifts into what this, this new budget line item that they're required to delve out. I really don't see that as being this massive burden, because functionally all we're doing is taking that, the dollars that the collectives are raising and then distributing and bringing it into a distribution from the media rights portion. Mm-hmm. Do you think schools see it that way and are going to shift maybe how collectives either distribute or use those funds? Or is this really a bad thing for schools?
I mean, I wish I had the answer. I think if I have the opportunity, as I'm now a free agent, to kind of step into some spaces and have some conversations, I think I'll be able to frame a better answer. I think how I see it is there is enough money to go around and circulate, and maybe it comes at the expense of a Jamie Wood and 17 other people in your athletic department. That is a option. But I think we can get creative. We have some smart people that when we have a lot of money, and I mean, everybody always says, even the outsiders, as private equity comes into the scene, it's like, we're not getting all the money out of this thing. We're not squeezing all the juice out of college athletics. And so I think it's going to take, in a similar sense to the administrative people, all these third parties and all these other groups that play a role in the ecosystem, we need to innovatively come up with new solutions, collectives being one of them. As we see the Missouri stuff that came out, we see Spire, we see all these other groups that are kind of innovatively moving into this space to squeeze more out of it. But I just think collaborative, and I think innovation. But I think that the challenge is we're trying to bridge the gap between tradition and innovation. And some of these traditions, especially like the institution I was previously at, very rich about traditions. It does not, innovation is not really in their core values. And so I think that's the challenge, is like, we have to look at new models. And I think, if I had to be the sacrificial lamb for per se, and not just me, but the people, I think in the essence of trying to do what's best for the athletes and what needs to happen for the future of this industry, I am all for that. I am one that believes in the value of football, and particularly many of our Black and brown student athletes, the value that they bring from a product on the field and court, needing to be compensated for that. And then I also believe in the opportunities that athletics presents to in our non-revenue sports. So I think we need to figure out a way to do it all. And it may come at a cost that we have yet to really figure out. And, I don't know what's to come.
It's really interesting too, because everybody loves to play the song that athletic departments are terribly unprofitable, and they're horrible parts of the institution from a business standpoint. But if you go outside of Division I and look at Division II, Division III, you look at NAIA, you even look at some of those low Division I, they're actually profitable parts of the institution. And so what that tells to me is it's not the fact that athletics department exists, it's how we are running athletics departments. And Stephen Farrig, our CEO, has talked about this a lot. You look back at the innovation of the digital camera, and Kodak was really early on in the technology, but they had made significant investments in their film cameras and that vertical of their business. So in their infinite wisdom, they didn't only they didn't miss the opportunity to double down on the digital camera, but they went the other direction and suppressed the digital camera and put in all these marketing campaigns about how bad digital technology was and that you shouldn't go that direction. And we all know where Kodak's at now, right? We're not talking about Kodak. We're talking about Canon and Nikon. Right. And you've got these huge institutions, and some of them are, to your point, holding on so tightly to what the old model was and unwilling to realize it is already gone. There is nothing left to hold on to. You either have to innovate and figure out a new way forward, or you or your department is going to go the way of the dodo. So it's a really, really interesting perspective. And I think as it relates to collectives too, like, do you think schools want collectives folded in closer to the institution, or do you think that they like that firewall as they move into this new model?
I think it depends. I think I talked to Tate a while ago about like it's all going to come down to the institutional risk tolerance. I don't think the NCAA is going to give a blanket statement of this is how revenue share is going to happen. I don't think the conference is going to do that. I think it could potentially create further fragmentation and confusion if each institution is implementing this in this way. So if there is no regulatory kind of streamlined process and route given from leadership above the institutional level, I think we run the risk of further dividing and further Title IX and equity issues if each institution is left to figure this out. Title IX is not like, okay, we got it, we're done, we got it figured out. It's an ongoing kind of consciousness and flow of like thought that we have to keep in mind as we implement these different components. And I think collectives at a distance allow you to kind of, you got the speedboat next to the cruise ship. And I think that's kind of a model, or those that want greater control and maybe don't have a great working relationship with that collective may say, hey, I want to fold it under. And so I'm intrigued to kind of see how that plays out. And I'm sure Tate has some thoughts on that too.
I really think, we work with obviously we work with over 100 schools. So that's daily conversation with them, work with a lot of collectives. I really think this comes down to what is the school's relationship with that collective? Like, there's no shortage of schools that they'll never say it publicly, privately, do not trust their collective, do not like what they're doing. They don't like the leadership that's there. They have no insight into the true finances, the revenue. That they're very just like, oh my God, I wish we could do this. I think you'll see those schools either bring it fully in-house or adapt to a new third-party model that's starting to come about that is more partnership aligned with the school. So I think those schools will be like, finally, thank you, let's bring this in. We got to figure out Title IX though. But on the flip side, there's a lot of schools that actually have now evolved into year 3 of really having a good partnership and business relationship with their collective, where they are able to say, this thing's flowing pretty well. It takes the risk off of our hands, so we don't have GC and compliance constantly freaking out about every little thing. They're able to say, when an athlete comes to them and says, hey, I want to be paid more or negotiate, they're able to say, hey, go talk to, the collective, go talk to them. That's out of our hands. There's a lot of schools that don't want to say, all right, let's sit down and have a conversation. They're not ready to do that. Especially if you're at a school. I saw this, forget which reporter was talking about this, but he's like, all right, if schools really are bringing this in-house, who's in charge of divvying up that money? Who's going to sit down and have the conversations with the players and say, this is what we believe you're worth. This is how much we're going to pay you. Like, I don't think there's a single school in-house administratively that is prepared to truly do that with players and agents right now.
Not at all.
So I really think, long story short, the wraparound, I think this depends on the school's relationship with their collective and their risk tolerance on that. But there will be some of both.
Well, and I think too, like there's a lot that collectives have done and been able to do as that speedboat around the cruise ship that I don't even think a lot of admins are aware of. That's a part of their day to day. And, we work with a lot of collectives. I've had a lot of conversations where they're like, love them. This is the collective leadership talking. Love the school, love working with them. They have no clue what I do on a day-to-day basis or how many people it would take to really do this, at scale for those that are focused on one sport or focused on one, tier or group of athletes. And, when you bring something like that in-house, you do have a responsibility to not just focus on, one sport or, the 10 to 12 athletes that really are going to move the needle. But I think the other interesting thing about it is if you watch and the lay fan may not be able to suss this out, but if you watch and pay attention, and you start to see how did those guys, put together that team. And it's not the marquee, names that are, the big splashes, but oh, that guy decided to come back, or oh wow, they really landed some of those mid-tier, really strong transfers. Like, it's those programs that have that collaboration communication line really dialed in and aren't just, hey, go splash cash and land somebody who's going to be on the news. You're going to start to see really clearly the ones who think just throwing money at a problem is going to solve it versus the ones who really understand the dynamic that's required to essentially, build a team and a sustainable program. So it's interesting to watch. Jamie, I got two questions for you to close, a real one and then a fun one. They're both real questions, but obviously barreling towards new era, new skill sets are required, new ability to kind of foresee and avoid problems is required in a new era. What's like 2 or 3 things that you think intercollegiate athletics departments or admins really need to dial in on, pay attention to, or change about how they operate into this new era?
Good question. I think maximizing your existing assets, and that is in people, that is in solutions. I don't know how many times that my institutions I've worked at, where we've just bought a software and use it for 30% of its capacity. Like,
Yeah.
and we paid $100,000 for a 3-year contract. Like, there's a lot of that frivolous spending that goes on that if we maximized and utilized these tools to its full capacity, I think it would help everybody. We would feel like we're not wasting money. It would probably optimize our operations. It would streamline some things. And I think, what I envision is doing your due diligence before you sign contracts. Right now, everybody's just trying to just be a leader and be first, and that may not be the wisest move to make. And if you don't have an expert or a person that can kind of view these opportunities from a variety of vantage points and lenses, the people that backdoor and just go directly to the AD because they have a relationship to sign on a contract, that is, to me, one of the most foolish things that a department could do, without sitting down, pressing pause, and sitting with this opportunity with the right people at the table to really poke holes in it and to ask the right questions. And Tate can probably relate. I dealt with a lot of that in my role with all these NIL startups and businesses that pop up, and they'll go to the AD, they'll email the head of external, they'll go all the different routes to get to you, but then I've got a community of people that have already been pitched and have already opted into this, so I can talk to them and kind of get the truth out of it. And I think that's something that I would say, if you're an AD, if you're an athletic department, make sure you're doing your due diligence before signing on to these contracts and these long-term deals.
A great way to put it, somebody put it this way, is like, you take the value of that contract. If you turned that into, all right, this is no longer a software, this is a person, and this is no longer a contract, this is a salary you're paying them, they would spend weeks with different committees on, like, okay, who's the right person to hire for this job? If we're going to hire a $100,000 position, right? Like, it's a multiple weeks long process of vetting that out. If this was a person and a hire that was being made, but sometimes when it comes down to it's a service or a software, it's like, oh, cool,
all right, I'll take it. We need it.
Yeah, we got to have it.
And I would add that doesn't just apply to new opportunities. I mean, I think that there's also something to be said about, hey, when your contracts come up with stuff that you've been using, are they prepared to take you into this new era, or are they going to be an incumbent part of your system that's actually holding you back and acting like that parachute when you're trying to run towards, the end zone? Because there's a lot of those too, of like, No, you don't want to go that way. Nah, you don't want them to do that. Nah, trust us. You want to stay with how we've been doing things, and that can be just as damaging.
For sure. And I think there's a bit of like, and I'm sure you all have benefited from it with Campus Inc. Is like once one school has you, you kind of benefit from like, oh man, we need to go ahead and do it. We got everybody in the conference but my school. So like there's a bit of that you do play in that space, but there's just I would want to customize this stuff. Like a lot of what I did, at least or tried to do at A&M, a lot of that I learned from Logan Hiddle and Kerry Hoyt at Ohio State. I don't believe you have to recreate the wheel with a lot of this stuff. You can learn from what's happening across campus and make it Aggie, make it whatever your mascot is, make it work for your ecosystem. And it may not be, a carbon copy, but some version of that you can pull the lever and make that work in your ecosystem. But I think a lot of people are, as we have pride in our institutions and then, we are the Buckeyes and we are whatever school, they want to do it themselves in their way, when in reality, I think they're just creating more work. And I think it seems like collectives are doing a little bit more of that, and they understand the collaborative and nature and the originality within each of their footprints.
Yeah. Well, all right. Time to move on to our last fun question.
Fun.
All right, Jamie.
We started with fun.
Yeah, we like to bookend it around here.
A reality show and a fun NIL question. All right. I know you're a food guy. Like myself, you have your own food Instagram page. So got to ask, if you could have, take you back to your playing days. You're again an Ohio State football player. NIL deal with any restaurant out there in America. It can be a chain, could be local to Columbus, but what would that be? Unlimited food.
No, I want today, Jamie. I want today, Jamie. Not athlete, Jamie.
All right, so I have so this is today, Jamie, with no health conscious.
That's right. That's right.
I would go with anything hibachi steakhouse. Give me a grill, and I want a personal grill with that installed in my home.
Ooh.
So give me the restaurant access. I can go visit whenever I want, but then also I need a grill at home so I can make my bacon, eggs, pancakes all at once.
On the hibachi. I love it. Adding in terms to the deal.
Usually people, I'm guilty of it too, just give like the restaurant. Jamie, I went with Fogo was my restaurant. I was like,
yes. See, this is a guy that's negotiated with HBO before. That's how you can tell. He's done it. He's been in the big leagues.
Oh man, I probably could have taken some lessons from Tate and from some business people, because I just signed it and said, know the name of the show. I probably should have said I need to know the name, because I don't know if I would have chosen to be associated to something called F Boy Island.
Hey, the good news is on the Wikipedia page, as I was doing my research, you have the notation of a nice guy. So you are 100% a nice guy. I can vouch for that right here. Jamie, I appreciate you being on. This is a great conversation. Really looking forward to seeing, where your career takes you, where NIL goes. I'm Adam. That's Tate. This has been another episode of the NIL Show. We will catch you guys next time.